Kirsten Schaffer. I'm the Executive Director of Women in Film here in Los Angeles, and it's great to be with all of you and have this incredible panel of women today talking about directing and writing dangerously, filmmakers on capturing the story. I want to thank our partners at Variety for working with us on this whole series. We launched a campaign a few weeks ago called Vote for Women, where we are encouraging members of the Academy and voters of the Independent Spirit Awards and all of the Guild and Union Awards that come up in this next month to really focus on women. And when you look at that ballot of over 500 names in every category, you see that nobody should ever be saying again that they can't find a woman to do a job on a set. So we are here to talk about the 5 amazing films that you all have written, and some of you have also directed or acted in, to talk a little bit about how you crafted those narratives and how you wove your other skills into the writing, or after the writing, as the case may be. So I'll just take a minute first to have each of you just say hi, your name, the name of your film, and a little bit about what inspired the story that you wrote. So Tara, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Tara Miele. I'm the writer-director of Wander Darkly. And the movie is about a relationship that's sort of on the verge when a couple gets into a car crash. And in the aftermath, the lead character believes that she's died in the car crash and isn't sure what's right or what's wrong or which way she's going. And it was inspired in part because my husband and I survived a pretty bad car crash about 7 years ago. And thank goodness we were fine, mostly fine. But we had two little girls at the time, like really little, 4 and 6 months old. And I was heavily concussed, and we went to the hospital and the whole thing. And I think something about being a parent changes your sense of your own mortality and the value of your life and needing to stick around. Coming out of that period, I just had this incredible sense of gratitude that I was very desperate to share. Like I was sitting in our messy, crazy little lives going, oh my God, we're so lucky to still be here. So for me, the process of Wander Darkly was really about trying to express an emotional reality, about perspective, and about gratitude. And that was the whole journey. So whenever somebody comes up to me and they're like, I felt this thing, I'm like, oh, I did it. Like I took a feeling out of my body, took 5 years to make a film about it, and then put it into somebody else's chest. And I find that the most powerful piece of this journey for me.
And Channing, how about you?
So I'm Channing Godfrey Peoples. I'm the writer director of Miss Juneteenth. And Miss Juneteenth is a story that's set in Texas. It's set in my hometown of Fort Worth, Texas. And it's about a woman named Turquoise Jones, who is a former beauty queen turned hardworking single mother. And she's preparing her rebellious teenage daughter for the Miss Juneteenth pageant and hoping to keep her from repeating her same mistakes. And I say that when I refer to Turquoise as a beauty queen because the Miss Juneteenth pageant is actually a scholastic beauty pageant for young Black women to gain college scholarship, and it's it's a little bit different than I think what we've come to understand about beauty pageants. It really is a sense of representation for young Black women, and it was something that inspired me early on. I remember growing up and going to the Miss Juneteenth pageant annually and seeing like all these beautiful young Black women just kind of glide out on stage, and they were every shade, they had every texture of hair, they were every shape and size. And one of the things that I really remember is I felt represented and I felt seen in going to the Miss Juneteenth pageant, and so it's something that's just stayed with me. And when I started researching the film, I knew I wanted to make it in this historically Black community that I was from. It's like I think if people have seen the film, it feels like a tiny town on screen, but it's actually Fort Worth is actually a major city, but this community that I was from felt like a small country town because it's like close knit and everybody knows everybody. And so I knew I wanted to set the film there for that reason. And when I went back and researched and said, what happened to the former Miss Juneteenth, there were some that I couldn't track down. And I said, yeah, that's the kind of story I want to make. I want to make a film about this woman who has this dream deferred, that knows that she just wants something for herself, even if she can't really articulate it in the moment, but also has these hopes and dreams for her daughter. And that part of it, I was really inspired by watching my own mom, who was single for much of my life, juggle her own dreams and raising children at the same time. And I later became a mother who was juggling my own dreams while raising a daughter at the same time. So the film has taken on different meanings as we've gone along to get it out into the world.
I think that's a good segue into Claire.
Hi, I'm Claire, and I'm the writer and actor in Herself. Herself basically came from my best friend, who's a single mother of three kids. She rang me when I was in New York trying to do pilot season and audition for loads of things, and she couldn't find anywhere to live, and she had to officially declare herself homeless in Dublin in order to get some temporary accommodation, which is when you have to live in a hotel or a kind of B&B for a while. And I guess I was just fueled with my anger on her behalf. And then also, I was angry with my own path because I couldn't get anywhere in screen acting, but I knew I could write somewhat from college. And it was like everything was wrong at that moment. And then a few hours later, it was like, boom, this idea came. I Googled cheap self builds in Ireland and then found that there is a such thing as building a house for €25,000, and it really inspired me. So the story just came in a flash. It was like a woman gets away from a desperately bad situation, in this case domestic violence. She needs a refuge, she doesn't have one, ends up in temporary accommodation, and then begins, inspired by her children actually, she's inspired to look into self-building. And just through the process of her starting out with an idea and asking for help, she kind of receives the right kind of help, like a new kind of help to empower her for the rest of her life. Um, and that's where that story came from. That's what we hopefully ended up making.
Thank you so much, Eliza.
Hi, my name is Eliza Hittman. I'm the writer and director of Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is about a teenager in Pennsylvania, in central Pennsylvania, who is pregnant, and there's nowhere to go because she is under 18. And in Pennsylvania, there are very strict parental consent laws that prohibit women under the age of 18 from getting abortions. So her and her cousin kind of sneak out of town on a Greyhound bus, and they spend 48 hours in New York City navigating a place they've never been to and a crisis. Um, the inspiration for the film really came from like a New York Magazine article I read ages and ages ago about women who travel to New York City for second trimester abortions, and it was talking all about how like they often sleep on park benches because they can't afford hotels, and they have to dump all their savings and money into the cost of the procedure. And that image, of a woman on a park bench in the middle of a crisis really haunted me. And I asked myself, like, what's her story and where is she coming from? And what is it like? Sorry about the phone. And I really, wanted to document what I thought was sort of this hidden journey that nobody would ever talk about, something that they would keep completely secret. And I think of my works, as being these explorations of these narratives that we would never speak about and that we often omit from, what we show on the screen. And that's sort of the gist of it.
So, Sarah, you have written a film about, a female icon who I think, uh, given how long Gloria Steinem has been at this work, probably enabled a lot of these stories to be told. And so, what was it like to adapt that turn her life into a screenplay?
Mm. Well, it was wonderful and joyful in that I got to meet Gloria Steinem, who's every bit as wonderful as you might think she is, and truly a deep listener in person as well as being an activist. It wasn't always abundantly clear how you tell the story. Her book, My Life on the Road, is sort of episodic and discursive, and what I really love about it, sorry, this just popped out, is that you learn so many things you wouldn't guess about Gloria Steinem and how she came to be, like her endurance for political activism and for being on the road sort of 6 days out of 7 or more partly came from going on the road with her father as a child, and he was sort of a junk dealer, I guess you could say, or he sort of peddled antiquities, and they really lived on the margins, and she wasn't in school, and they would drive around, he would sell things. And she says that she really learned how to be on the road carrying very little from that. And then also when she went to India as a young woman, she learned to travel light and to listen to other women. So she would participate in these story circles, which I think in some ways became the basis for consciousness raising groups in the States, and would listen to stories about how ethnic minorities in India had villages sort of pillaged and women were raped, and they were surprised that this outsider wanted to listen to their stories. And then, one thing I learned was in India, she met a woman who helped with give a foundation to Gandhi's nonviolence movement, and she said, "Oh, honey, Gloria, he learned everything from us. He learned everything from the women about nonviolent activism." So for me, it was how do you take all these extraordinary bits of things you might not know about this woman? Like a lot of people wouldn't know Gloria Steinem partly became an activist because she was afraid of public speaking, which you would never think. But she hated public speaking, was terrified, and wanted to write about abortion and women's issues. And none of the men in charge of the magazines would let her. They said, "What are you, one of those crazy women?" And she said, "Yes, that's exactly who I am." And she dedicates the book to her abortion provider. So I guess the challenge was how to take all these parts and make them into a whole. And Julie Taymor, the director, initially came to me with the idea of having different people play Gloria, different women, and sort of have them talk to each other and have them be on a bus talking to each other about their different lives, and that's how it came to be.
It's an incredible film, as are all of these. One thing that I noticed, because I either watched or rewatched them in the last couple of weeks, that one thing they all have in common is that they're personal stories. So 3 are coming of age films, 2 are about women who've suffered great loss. One obviously about a great icon, but even though they're personal stories, they all speak to a really wide audience. And so my question for each of you is, were you thinking about the audience and that viewer when you were crafting the story? Like, were you thinking about who was going to watch it, who was going to appeal to, and how did that factor into what you were writing? And so I'll start with you, Eliza.
Who is the audience? I think it's tricky because obviously I'm making a film about such a divisive topic that deals with a woman's issue. And, unfortunately, I think that, all of those things sort of push the film into a certain kind of niche, like stories centered around young men are considered, white men are considered universal narratives, and movies about women's issue get kind of pushed to the side. So I was trying to sort of like bring it back a little bit, and not have male characters really in the film, and center the film around her and make it kind of this hero's journey in a sense. But it's tricky because it's like I want young people to watch the film, but it's also not like a movie that's really kind of made in a way that says it's a movie for youth. But that's something that does interest me. Like, how do you make kind of dark and artful films for young people. And that was part of who I wanted to speak to with the film. All of these sort of like young people across the country who are dealing with these very real issues and live in one of 37 states, you know, where you don't have access to reproductive care. But I wanted to make the film, you know, appeal to as much as possible the widest audience, but I don't know necessarily what that means or how you do that. I don't know.
Well, you got a PG-13 rating, which I think helps.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was a win for the movie because actually the character in the first cut or cuts of the film said fuck like 3 times, and the rating system people came back and said, "Oh, if you take out 2, you can have PG-13." And I was like, "Amazing, done." You know, so we dubbed over like a couple of fucks and we won.
It's so nuts. I think my 6-year-old says fuck more than I do. So maybe that says something about my parenting.
My 7-year-old also, Kirsten. I'm with you. I'm not going to let you hang out there. I'm with you.
I actually have the same question for you, Channing. And part of why I'm asking all this question is because, you know, if it's not obvious, I feel like women's stories often sort of get put into this category of they're personal and therefore they're small. And I think these are all really big movies, and they obviously have a wide platform and are, you know, fully in the awards race this season, which means people are watching them and loving them and caring about them. And so I just think for other writers, it's useful to know, you know, sort of how you got there, and so I'm asking the question to kind of get at that a little bit more, like, which you answered wonderfully, Eliza. But I wondered, Channing, what your take on this is. Were you thinking about audience?
I have to be honest. I can't say that I was. Miss Juneteenth is my first feature film, and I knew that I wanted to write something that was entirely personal. I didn't realize it was going to be this personal, and that I would be experiencing it in real time. Honestly, becoming a parent for the first time as well, but I really was influenced by this community that I grew up in. You know, one of the things that I noticed, especially about the women in this community, was they, you know, had this sense of like determination, this get it done no matter what quality, but they always carried themselves with grace. And I think that, you know, I saw in the women in the community, I saw in my own family, I saw in myself, you know, in my own experiences as a woman, and you know, but I definitely saw it in my mom, and so I wanted to write a journey about a journey that was personal to me. And I really had originally written the script really from the perspective of having watched my mom. I mentioned that earlier, you know, and then later when I became a mom, it informed the journey in a different way. It especially, you know, I think there was a tough love version of Turquoise on paper. And then once I became a mom, you know, um, I saw it in a different way. And so I would be hopping in, you know, with the actors, especially with the Turquoise and Kai characters, and say, you know, um, I really want to find the intimacy of their bond. I really want to be able to see that on screen. And I also experienced this joy in having my own daughter that I had never really, I can't even explain it now. I'd never really felt it before. And I said, I want to see that joy between them, but I also want to be realistic about the fact that this mother and daughter, or, you know, I don't even know if I can describe it as being at odds. They have a difference of opinion about how they're navigating their own dreams, you know? And so, but I wanted to be able to convey that sense of complexity. So I don't think I ever was like, is there a specific audience, you know, I want to appeal to, or, you know, do I want to appeal widely? I didn't know, you know, I just was like, I'm writing this about this neighborhood that's never been, you know, this community that's never been put on screen before. And so I didn't know if it would resonate with people outside of this community, you know. And fortunately, it has. You know, people have seen different things in the film. They brought their own journeys to the film, you know, in the mother-daughter connection, you know, and seeing the uniqueness of the community, and seeing the way that people embrace Juneteenth. And I don't know if everyone's seen the film, but I always have to give my little explanation, which hopefully I won't have to do this much longer. But Juneteenth is a day in Texas in which we commemorate the fact that our ancestors, unfortunately, found out they were free 2.5 years after they were actually free. They were enslaved people in Texas. And so Juneteenth was so much a part of the fabric of my life that I was shocked when I left Texas and realized that people didn't really know what it was. And that happened for me in graduate school. I went to grad school at USC in Los Angeles. And I would say to people, in the summer, I'd say Happy Juneteenth, and they would just kind of look at me like, what, what is Juneteenth? And I was shocked by that, because it's so much a part of my upbringing. It was affirmational for me as a young Black woman in Texas. And the centerpiece of it, the Miss Juneteenth pageant, especially was essential for me as a young Black girl. So, I wanted to see those things on screen. I especially have a mission as a human being and as a filmmaker to see more stories that center Black women on screen, because I didn't have that growing up. What I did have was I had like Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and people like that. I could read stories that were, that centered Black women, and they were complex journeys about Black women in their lives. And so, I wondered, why I didn't see more of those films made. So that's just part of my mission as a human being. And I hoped, I think deep down in my heart that it resonated. But really, when I was making the film, I was just really trying to figure out how to get this film into the world.
Thank you for that. And as a parent of an African American child and a white child, I appreciate that you're bringing these stories to the world for my girls and for all the girls, because I do believe it's a universal story, but speaks very specifically to African American girls who will have access to this as they grow up. So
And I appreciate you that you said that, because I'm in the same boat with my daughter. For me, Miss Juneteenth was about, I mentioned earlier, it meant representation for me. I could look up and see, young Black women. I've said this before, but it was like my own version of Miss America. And I need, my daughter is a young toddler, and I want something for her to be able to look to have that same sense of representation.
Claire, were you thinking about audiences when you wrote this? Who did you want to see this movie or speak to?
I would say maybe I wasn't as aware of an audience quite at first. I think at first I was thinking of the women who've been through it, only because one of my first point of contacts was a woman who'd already been through Sandra's journey, who was working in a women's aid shop. Like that's a body of people that support women that are looking for help with this kind of issue of domestic violence. And I went into the shop, and she was one of the first people I spoke to. And I told her what I was trying to do, which is like, I'm trying to make this film. I'm just starting on my own. I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to write a movie about a woman who's leaving her partner at the beginning of the movie. And then what happens? And she got so excited, and she grabbed me on the arm. She said, "Oh my God, please don't show her as a victim. Oh my God, please don't show her as a victim." And I was like, okay. And that was kind of my only mission at the start. As in, I knew anyway that it was always going to have this quiet determination, because I was more interested in ignoring the archetypal sort of battered woman, if there is a such thing. Just wasn't interested. I was like, okay, can we look at this in a new way? And can we show there's no good or bad, right? Or good or evil or whatever. It's like, this is a woman in a situation. She's not labeled as victim just because she's in the situation. She's actually always been a hero and a soldier. She's just trying to deal with what she can do every day. And then you see that quiet determination bring her to where she is in the movie, where she becomes determined to build a house for herself. And in that vein, I also want us to look at this abuser and not like just go bad. Go, what the hell is going on there? Like, what is going on? Because in society, we don't need to just go and give refuge to the victims when the damage has already been done. It's like, what's going on with that person that's doing the abuse? Because the war is on the home front at the minute. It's inside four walls. And like, especially now with coronavirus, I was just like, oh my God, there's so many people right now in a war, like because of this pandemic, and because they've nowhere else to go. And so I think my main concern was not quite as much the audience as much as the tone of it. And I wonder, can I look at this story in a new way? And I suppose in retrospect now, and as the movie went on, I suppose I did used to pray to myself that somebody in that situation, or maybe in something close to that situation, or has experienced it, might see it and not even be inspired, but just feel heard. I think that was important to me, as if it was like a little signal just to say, like, there are people out there to reach out to. And then I think that was maybe a little hope at the beginning. But like now, I just kind of think when you're writing, I think you, like personally myself, I love to think I'm writing something that I'd want to watch myself. I mean, just being just like to keep the taste in track. But yeah, but I would say that.
I think you're really successful in creating that character as someone who's not a victim, because you're showing so much dimensionality in her character, and also the way that it was edited, right? Or that you wrote the story, so that you get more and more pieces and more flashbacks as you move through it. And I think that really helps to develop her sort of full character before you, as a viewer, you're seeing all of the abuse.
Yeah, because it's not about just watching glamorized violence. It's experiencing it from her point of view. I think that was the main thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sarah, how about you? Are you thinking about audience?
I don't think I was, and I suppose when I write for the theater, similarly, I get into a kind of platonic zone where I'm seeing the thing as it happens, and I'm not thinking of the watchers yet. But I will say, as the movie has come out, I've been really moved that women and men in different generations have responded to the story. Um, some young people who didn't know about Gloria Steinem necessarily um, seem to be really excited to now know about her, and then some women who were Gloria's generation really identified with the arc of her life. And then, I remember seeing there's a play version of Gloria's life that Emily Mann wrote, and they had talking circles afterwards, which Gloria really wanted to do, which I thought was such a beautiful idea because it's part of her work as an activist. The night I went, a young man, maybe 18, got up afterwards and said, "I didn't know about your life, but now I do, and I'm inspired to go be an activist." And I thought, oh my God, she just radicalized a young man. How great. Because the work is for both or all genders to be doing. It's not just for women to be doing. And one thing that resonates, hearing all these amazing women talk about their films, is stories of resilience and healing, rather than stories of, you know, uh, fake romance or glorified violence, which is so much of what we see. So when you see a movie that's about, um, a hero's journey, as you said, a Bildungsroman, I never know how to say that word, but from a woman's point of view, and to see quiet determination instead of, swashbuckling, it's so wonderful, I think, for the next generation to see.
Thanks, Sarah. And Tara, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I very much believe if you are trying to make a movie for everybody, make a movie for nobody. And so I try to be as specific and honest as I can when I'm writing. But no, I have to like shut everybody out. Like the only people who are like around when I'm writing are like critics in my head and evil, mean people. And I'm like, okay, everybody go away. Like I can't. I think if you start to sort of think of how is it going to be received, there's, for me at least, it sort of muddies the water, and it makes it much harder to see what I think and what I feel and what, it's like trying to step into those shoes of a character in a moment. But I'm so interested about how, both Sarah and Eliza mentioned the hero's journey, because I've very much been, as a writer, trying to explore what a woman's version of a hero's journey looks like. Like if the hero is typically like a swashbuckling man who goes in with a large sword and goes into the cave metaphorically, and then is reborn, what does it look like for a woman? And so even in the structure of Wander Darkly, which was much more, of a spiral than a straight line, and sort of going deep internally in order to grow externally, in order to move on externally. So I was very interested in that, and probably just because of the nature of Wander Darkly, because it was such an internal story, I was aware that it would not be like for everybody, that there would be something challenging about this project. But as the script got further along, there was certainly an awareness of, okay, so now I've gotten this thing out and it's on the page. How do I make sure that the audience is with me through all these turns and all these moments? And that was, from the second draft all the way through the last edit, and even through our sound mix. It was like, how do we make sure that we're like keeping the audience um, in her head and in her state of discomfort? Or when do they get to be grounded? When do they get to feel a little bit of relief? So when I'm writing, I guess I think not at all about audience. And then as I move along, I think you're thinking more and more about audience as you get closer to the end, and how the movie is resonating and how it's landing for people.
The thing I remember about the film, the places where it feels like it really opens up often are in landscape, right? So when they're on the boat in the water, like you move from being sort of in her apartment, in her head, onto the streets or into the open water, and that's where you get that more sort of expansive feeling. So they
Right, and that was so deliberate, right? Because her present state is actually quite sick and ill and confined and in this denial and like quite oppressive. But her memories with him are this place where she sort of is like opening up and has this like, is gaining the perspective she needs by diving back into those moments.
Right, and then as an audience member, you get that too.
So.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about teenage girls for a minute, because it's a theme in a couple of these. In Eliza, in your film, you have this central character who is so quiet and kind of awkward, and I thought you really captured that awkwardness between teenage girls really well. So she's traveling with her cousin, who's her best friend, and yet there are very few words spoken between them, and that just seemed. I mean, I was not that teenager, but it seemed familiar to me, that I feel like I see that in the teenage girls in the neighborhood. And so did you spend time with teenage girls, or sort of studying them, using them as live models, or how did you come to that?
Yeah, I think, the film, even though it's described as being sort of naturalistic and realism, like I'm not aspiring to a kind of conversational realism. And everything is sort of intentionally really stripped back. And there's this character at the center of the film who's incredibly defensive and protecting herself. And what she doles out about her life is very minimal. And I think it all comes from, coping with the shame of what she's going through. And there's this sort of theme of our inarticulateness around what we are going through that sort of runs through all of my films. But I wouldn't say that like I think you work around your limitations as as a creator, and I'm not somebody who is trying to write a certain kind of dialogue that drives a story. I'm trying to sort of drive the story by aligning the audience with what someone's going through versus like what they're saying about themselves, and how versus the story being propelled forward by some kind of like version of conversational reality. And I'm just not trying to capture that in a kind of real way. It's all about what she's experiencing and interiorities and documenting thought. But yeah, I've sat across the table from plenty of very hyper defensive teenagers who kind of can't say anything about themselves, nor do they want to reveal much. And yeah, and it's not something from studying. It's like kind of more of a mechanism that I explore while writing.
And Channing, similarly in your film, I mean, your character is a very different kind of teenager, but there are still those sort of quiet moments, and where you can see her sort of struggling with, you know, what she's going to say and how she's going to manage her situation. And so, were you spending time with teenagers as you were writing this?
Um, I think I was looking back to my own journey as a teen, and yes, you know, I spent time with teens to make sure that I was hearing dialogue in a way that was natural. But I really, you know, wrote the script. I mean, as a writer, I write like I hear people talk, and for a film that's so personal, you know, I mean, even you know, on the page, like literally. There's a specific way that people speak in the community that I speak. And that's the way that I wrote it down. And I went through early on with Alexis, who plays Kai, even before we shot. I saw something that was interesting in her audition that I felt really, you know, I felt like there's something that I wrote down for her description, and I'm probably going to misquote myself, but I think the description is something like Kai 14, her eyes look like she's seen too much too soon. And that's the quality that I was looking for in the actor. And when she came in for her audition, I felt that, you know, it wasn't anything explicitly, you know, that came off the page. I was like, oh, you know, she's it. But I felt like she was someone that I wanted to reach out to, and I knew that there was so much that I wanted to explore that was off the page, you know, with the actors in particular, especially in exploring their interiority as characters, you know. And so that's how she came to be. I was also thematically exploring this idea of delayed freedom and what it meant for each of these characters. And there's always this idea, I think, for Kai as a teen that, for me, you know, I can't say what it is for people who watch it. I like to give people the space to find things. But for me as a writer, I was always like saying, it scared me that Kai may have a dream that she's exploring or potentially exploring or interested in, and it may, you know, fall away because like Turquoise has this definitive dream for her based on Turquoise's own delayed dreams, you know. So that's what I was always searching for, just thematically, like how to say, you know, what happens when good things come too late for each of these characters, because basically that's what happened for the enslaved people in Texas.
Right. This is kind of like your beauty pageant, this film, right?
I'm not sure what you mean.
I mean, it's, you know, this is the dream, right? Is this project, and I hope and believe you're going to win some awards.
Oh, oh, that's what you mean. I'm not even that far into it. I think for me, it was such a long journey with the film. I probably started having ideas for it a decade ago. It took us 7 years even to get the film produced and into the world. So, you know, that was pretty much a dream realized for me. So everything that's happened afterwards is just kind of still mind blowing. And I'm just so happy to see it reach audiences, because it was like we talked about it earlier, but it was such a specific film. I was just like, wow, you know, I wonder will people get it outside of this juke joint that I grew up sneaking into, you know, from my teenagehood on. So yeah, I'm just glad it's in the world.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to pivot a little bit from kind of youth to mentorship. In your film, Claire, you know, one of the really important characters is Sandra's kind of mentor and patron, right? Who not only gives her the space to build a home, but also in many ways gives her the confidence to move forward. There's that one kind of pivotal scene where she's about to go into court, and she says to Sandra, like, you've got this, like, tell your story, tell your truth, and that's all you can do. And so we talked so much about how mentorship plays a role in this industry, and helping women to move their creative endeavors and their careers forward. Is there somebody who has mentored you or that sort of inspired that piece of the story?
Yeah, probably Eliza Lloyd, who directed the movie, because she sort of changed my life. I was doing theater work with her, and that first theater project I did with her really changed my view of um, a what stories we could tell, would be, oh my god, did it show me like we need to have more women, and we need to have more women of color and people of different abilities in our stories. And it was just like real duh kind of stuff. But at the same time, to be part of things where we did a theatre project basically with the Donmar Warehouse in London that then went to St. Anne's in New York. And it was a project that was basically all female Shakespeare, but we set it in a women's prison. And in our first cast, we had two women who had experienced being in prison and not even qualified actors be part of our show. And both have gone on to become professional actors and got trained and got signed. And we all became friends and like nurtured them towards a kind of new life. And we did a lot of workshops with prisoners, etc. So during all this time, I had the great Harriet Walter, who plays Peggy in the film, who gives Sandra her land and a loan of money. I also had her around me, and basically between Harriet and Phillida and many other women in my career, I've realized that I think the truest greatness is when you know you've achieved something yourself and you're willing to pass on what you've learned or pass on a little piece of your pie that you have. And I know, like, I know it's an obvious thing in some ways, and we all think like, oh, the obvious thing is to go and mentor people. But in the movie, then I felt this huge gut thing about like the land. So like in Ireland and in lots of places on the planet, like we think we own the planet, like humans, like we think we own land, and it's just so not ours. Like it's a planet, like floating around space, and like, and then we come along, we draw lines, and we say, you own that bit, I own this bit, and then like, oh no, 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 you have to pay a stupid amount of money for this little bit of land so you can have shelter over your head. Like it just wrecked my head anyway. This notion, and I loved the idea of showing an old woman who has experienced enough in her life to be able to let go of land and let go of like needing to hang on to possession um in just such a really graceful way, and just know that it wasn't just like a Disney moment of like, oh, here it is and here's the money and here's everything. It was like, no, you have a spirit just like mine. You're determined to help yourself and be independent and empower yourself. So I'm just going to give you a leg up onto the wall. You know, I'm not going to do it for you because that actually ruins the journey for you. I'm just going to give you the leg up. And I really wanted to show that aspect of how women can kind of gather and be a community, but still give that woman herself her own authority and agency as well, you know, because I think it's important to have both. And so that was important to me, I think, with Peggy's character and that kind of legacy.
I appreciated also that you had the neighbor pop in and out occasionally, who was, you know, a man who was not thrilled that they were building this house back there, and they just don't, you know, they don't let it affect them, right? They just keep moving forward.
Yeah, and I think Peggy's great at kind of, as you say, in the court moment and everything, just saying, just tell the truth, because that's actually all that matters. And even in those moments, she just kind of is like, oh, stop fussing, get on with it. And I kind of love that about girls, especially on film sets. Like I love the way Phillida Lloyd, for example, you know, that you were saying about, I just remember you saying about the swashbuckling man coming in and being loud and proud and have to push through. So Phillida Lloyd is amazing. I think she's the symbol of how a woman really works. Like when she's a leader, she speaks really quietly and everybody slowly gathers round and everybody listens like really intensely, and everybody then knows, what the intention of the scene is, from the lighting person to the runner to me. It's like a really amazing thing, and everybody is just like quietly working away then, and then we just do it. And it's very economical, I find. So I thought that was cool as well along the way.
There's a lot of questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to take a few here. For you, Sarah, when you are writing or drawn to a story or character, how do you approach that when you actually go to write the script, right? So there's sort of the difference between something that pulls you in and then how you kind of manifest it on the page.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I just really quick want to respond to a couple of things Claire said so beautifully. That scene with Harriet was so incredible to me. We never see women mentoring each other in film. Never, ever, ever. We don't see it. We see women displace each other. That's what we see. And it was such a beautiful moment. And just thinking about my own mentors, and Paula Vogel was my teacher and the writer who mentored me, and thinking about Gloria Steinem's journey on this earth, constantly mentoring other women. She has a bracelet she made with little beads on it that says, imagine that you are linked, not ranked, which I think is great to also remember in things like award seasons. But so many things are going through my head, like the hero's journey for women versus men. You know, with men, it's like you go to a cave, the monsters become bigger and bigger on page 30, 60, and 90. You have to kill a bigger and bigger and bigger monster. And it occurs to me, well, what if you fed the monster on page 60? And I see that in a variety of ways in all of your films. What if you fed the monster? And then what if the monster was transformed? Anyway, sorry, that was a rant. How do I actually write the thing versus imagine the thing? That is just butt in chair. That is put your ass in the chair and have a nice cup of Yorkshire Gold tea, and and forget about the world and write. I that's maybe not very useful, but for me, the most important thing is getting a character to start speaking. So if you get a character to start speaking to you, all you really have to do is listen. You don't have to push. Um, um, it's really about listening, which, you know, again, is I think one of Gloria Steinem's great gifts is who she is as a listener. If you ever get the opportunity to be with her in a room, um, again, like with Philida Lloyd, there's great power in that kind of quiet, attentive listening, transformative power, and we don't see it enough.
Tara, there's a question here about what kinds of stories you all are finding yourselves drawn to during this time, and what are you currently writing about? I guess I would preface that by saying, are you able to find time to write during a pandemic with children homeschooling?
Yes. I also have a TV directing career, and I have been lucky enough this year to say no to everything because I didn't want to leave my kids and didn't want to be on set and deal with COVID and all that. So I had this beautiful stretch of a year where I developed a lot. And I am writing two things. One, I'm doing a biopic about Carol Burnett's life that I'm quite excited about, and her daughter. And that is, you know, it's something that really spoke to me. It's a mother-daughter story. It's I think what I keep telling my agents is I want to make things that are additive. I'm not really interested in like nihilism or like anything that is a sort of we all die alone. It's not my experience. Maybe as a woman or as a person, that the people who have passed in my life were horribly, bitterly alone. Even when it was sad circumstances. But so yeah, so I'm doing that, and then I'm working on a pilot that's set where I grew up in the 1980s on the South Shore of Long Island, with lots of high hair and IROC-Zs, and sort of a place where feminism didn't exist for my very young Catholic mom, even though she was obsessed with Gloria Steinem and writing for the Penny Saver. And it was very much in my world. But outside of our little bubble, it might as well have been the 1950s in that community. So yeah, I'm interested in exploring women's stories, and definitely trying to it's funny. It's like, it's all just an exploration and what I'm sort of curious about and what I'm trying to figure out within myself, and half confessional, So I think that's the sort of stuff that, like, when something speaks to you, if you're going to write and direct a project, you live with it for such a long, long time. So I'm just looking for things that get under my skin and make me have like reactions that I can't deny. It just takes so much for me to want to dive into something, but that sort of answer that.
Channing, are you finding time to write? And if so, what are you drawn to in this time?
Yes, definitely. I've been writing. I think it it just feels like a compulsion sometimes. I have to sit down and write. But I've since Miss Juneteenth, I've directed an episode of television. There's a show called Generation that's coming out on HBO Max that I had a chance to direct. And that was a wonderful experience, even in the midst of COVID. And I'm kind of slowing down on directing in COVID because it's quite an experience. But I love that show. I also am adapting. There's a television version of Miss Juneteenth in development, and I've partnered with UCP on a first look deal. So I'm kind of, there are other stories that I want to tell with them as well. And I'm also working on my next original, which is close to my heart. I haven't even discussed that with my toddler yet, so I can't talk about that here.
Totally fair. There's also some questions coming in just about career. And so I think these are sort of similar. How did you put together the funding for this film? And also, how did you find an agent? And maybe those things are related.
Is that for me?
That's for you, yeah.
Um, I wish I had my producers here because they would probably be much more adept at talking about funding. So I'll defer to them on that. As far as finding an agent, I actually did not um, partner with an agent until after I made my film. I had been in conversations with agents for a while. I knew I had a very specific style and way that I wanted to, tell the story. And I wanted to make sure, people understood me as a storyteller. And a big part of that was getting Miss Juneteenth into the world. And I'm also very, very thoughtful about partnerships. And so it takes me a while. But I think, because this was a question I think I had a lot in film school, like how do you find an agent? I'm sure the other women on this platform can talk more specifically to that. But I think, once your work starts to get into the world, in my case, agents found me in a way. So, and I took my time with it, and I urge people to do that. But everyone has a different trajectory, and it's like some people like to partner with an agent right away, and really have the work come out of that partnership, but I did it a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. How about you, Eliza? Do you have a take on either of these questions, budgets or agents?
I can say like the budget for the film was really cobbled together, even though it was my third feature, it was a tough one to get made. And I was very lucky to find support in unexpected places. And the BBC came into the film very early on, even though there's no UK ties. And the head of the BBC Films is just very sort of strong-willed and announced that the BBC was a global brand and they could invest and support whatever artist they wanted. But I had to find four other partners to come in to make the movie for not very much money, if I'm being honest. It's not a big movie. It's a low budget movie. And in terms of agents, it's like a really long struggle for me. I didn't get an agent out of Sundance with my first feature, and that was really discouraging in 2013. And it took time until like the next movie was really kind of creeping towards production that people came in and I felt like at a festival, there's a lot more pressure, I think, to just kind of like jump at people and people are jumping at you. But in between projects, I would say that I took a lot of initiative in that search. And first I approached managers who worked with people I thought were like-minded in their sensibility and tried to find a way to make that connection to a manager. And then a manager helped me navigate this kind of big, mysterious agency world, which is not easy to understand as like a real outlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Pivoting to another question here, Claire, this is for you. When you all were shooting the film, did any unexpected challenges come up? And I would add on to that, as an actor who wrote the script, was there anything that changed when you were actually shooting from the original script?
Yeah, there was. Because sometimes a location just means that you, like, some lines are null and void, or they have to be slightly changed. Or in the middle of the court scene, when I realized the judge didn't cover parental alienation, which I had studied incredibly well, but somehow left out a line, or it got missed in the redraft. And I was running up to the actress going, "I'm so sorry, I have to make you say a really annoying line last minute." So I wrote it out on paper for her and she could read it under the desk. You know, it was grand. She could kind of glance down. So sometimes there was some last minute, like, whoa, you know. And then I think really most things with filming I've learned, because my own feature film was sort of my first ever lead in a film, or like a big role anyway. I realized that, like, it really is a visual storytelling thing at first, and it seems very basic at the start, and you're just trying to go, what do we want in the frame at first? Or is it going to be what I only discovered recently, something that a TV director I just worked with called a oneer, where you actually have everything happen in the one shot, which is an unusual thing, but it's almost a bit like theater. And I was like, oh, is that what that is? And there's all these things I figured out along the way, which are great. But the problems that sometimes arise can be great, and they can create great opportunities, like for the actors. And it's how you deal with the problem in the moment. And when I look back at the film now, I kind of go, I don't even remember shooting half the stuff we did, because I felt like really we were like almost documentary making. We were just doing our stuff, and the cameras were following us and what we were doing. So yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a really bad problem. Oh, the one bad problem about doing rain machine scenes is they put you in this, they just seal you in for like 4 hours. So I just remember only drinking a few sips of Coca-Cola and nearly dying of dehydration. So that's one problem.
Did you guys actually build the house?
Yeah, we built it. Yeah. I mean, we did a fast forward build. So
Yeah.
it was incredibly uneconomical for an independent shoot, because what we had to do was shoot the first bit of the build and then go off and do something while the crew fast forward builded.
Right.
You know, and then we do all stuff that was offsite and then come back to that bit. So it was very much to do with the build of the house. And so it was difficult, but I think it was worth it. Yeah.
Well, we're just about at time. That went so quickly. I want to thank all of you for spending this time with us and sharing those pieces of insight and wisdom with this audience. Good luck over the next few weeks. We are rooting for you, and we're also really excited for your next projects. And we're here for you. So thank you.
Thanks, Kirsten.
Thanks a million. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.